Welcome to Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo.
Welcome to Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo. Anthony is a Massachusetts attorney who helps families navigate divorce, custody disputes, and criminal charges that often overlap. With offices in Lowell and North Andover, he represents clients across Middlesex, Essex, and Suffolk counties in both family and criminal courts. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and today we're talking about what to do if you're served with divorce papers in Massachusetts. Welcome back, Tony. I'm ready to get into this. How about you?
I am. Thanks, Lisa. Good morning.
Tony, when someone is served with divorce papers in Massachusetts, what usually goes through their mind in that moment? And what's the first thing that they should understand about what's happening to them legally?
I would say normally when someone comes to me, they're already 5 steps ahead of where they need to be thinking. They're thinking, what am I going to be paying in alimony? What's going to happen to the house? What's going to happen to my 401k? And those are all obviously very important things to be considering. But in the initial first step, those are all months away. I always tell people you have to take a divorce one step at a time. It's a very scary process. It is a very emotionally intensive process. So step one is don't panic. Find a professional that you can work well with, like an attorney who is experienced in this area. And the number one thing I tell every client is get a therapist, because the 2 worst things that people go through are death and divorce. If you don't already have someone that you speak to, getting a therapist is critical in this process, because you are going to want to vent, and you're not necessarily going to want to vent to your family or your friends or your coworkers. Finding that pressure relief valve, I find, is really helpful to my clients, because the average contested divorce could last you anywhere from 9 months to a year. I have a divorce right now that's going on year number 4. So it can be an incredibly long and stressful process. So taking it one step at a time is hugely critical.
And then once someone receives divorce papers, what are the immediate deadlines or legal steps that they need to be aware of?
So immediately upon being served, you have 20 days to file an answer and counterclaim, or that's if you do have a counterclaim. So things like, alimony, child custody. It's a very basic form that's filled out by your lawyer or typed up by your lawyer. But you do immediately have to start thinking about the automatic mandatory financial disclosures. So within 45 days of being served divorce paperwork in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you are automatically required to turn over certain financial documents that go back over 3 years. So you're going to want to work with your lawyer on starting to pull those together. Things like bank records, records of any stock accounts, IRAs, any loans you've applied for in the past 3 years, things like that. But you'll want to start talking to your lawyer about how this is going to play out.
One of the things that's rambling through my head is the biggest mistakes that people make. I've heard stories of how folks start to move money out of their joint account or open a new account. I'm sure that there are many mistakes that people make that you've seen. What do you notice, or what are you aware of, and what do you want to warn people about the days or weeks after being served with divorce papers?
What you just mentioned is actually the number one issue I see people do. When you are served with the divorce papers, there is an automatic financial restraining order which goes into effect. So it's Rule 411 of the Massachusetts Supplemental Rules of Probate and Family Court Procedure. And it essentially says that you are not allowed to make major financial changes. You can't spend money for things other than ordinary and necessary living expenses or your lawyer. You can't take someone off health insurance. I just had that argument last week with someone who filed a divorce and then took her husband off the health insurance, and now I'm fighting with her lawyer. So making any kind of drastic changes from the status quo is always the number one mistake. you start moving money, it looks like you're trying to hide things, and that's going to make a judge suspicious down the line. So this again goes back to the first thing I said, which is don't panic. Take a breath, find a lawyer, and work through this with a lawyer.
It's not a time to be rushing around or taking action and making decisions. That is crystal clear from your answers. Many people wonder whether they should contact their spouse right away or try to work things out. From your experience, when does that happen? And when can it actually make the situation worse?
Well, I would say the number one question is, can you reach out to your spouse? Are there any legal impediments, such as did you wind up in the divorce court because of some kind of domestic violence allegation or a restraining order, things like that? If those are not the case, ask yourself whether or not reaching out to your spouse would be productive. If you've had the last 6 or 8 months talking about this divorce, and the reason you got papers is because you couldn't come to an agreement, then that communication may ultimately be fruitless and in fact may be detrimental. But if this comes as a complete shock, I would say absolutely, it's not the worst idea in the world to try to reach out to the other person and say, can we work this out amicably? Because contested divorces get very expensive very quickly. I mean, you're imagining a situation where you have a lawyer on each side. Every time that lawyer talks to the other lawyer, both of you are paying a bill. If the two of you are able to have those communications, it's a great thing, and I strongly recommend it. But you want to ask yourself the history of those types of conversations before you try to engage in it, because if it hasn't worked before, it's probably not going to work now. So you're better just going through the normal process at that point.
Yeah. And then how early in the process do issues like custody, parenting time, temporary financial support start to come up?
So that should be something handled very early on, particularly depending on the time of year that the divorce is filed. So for example, anytime I start to get into the fall, if my clients are served a divorce, I say, we need to start looking at how you're going to file your taxes next year. Because again, like I said, the average contested divorce is probably going to last between 9 months and a year, which means tax season will have come and gone before you get any kind of resolution. So having temporary orders as to how the parties are going to file their taxes, who may or may not claim the children as a deduction. Is it joint? Is it going to be married filing separately? Temporary spousal support and child support are very important issues, because in the majority of divorces, people are now living separately. I have had divorces where people continued to reside together during the pendency of the divorce. It's fairly uncommon, but it does happen. But you want to be able to square away those child custody and financial issues right away, and don't necessarily depend on everyone just being amicable and saying, well, I'm going to let you take the children when you want to. You want to have some kind of legal agreement. Even if you're both 100% in agreement in the beginning, put it down in writing and file it with the court so that the court signs off on it. Because in many cases, as this case proceeds, tensions will be inflamed, and it's best to have a legally enforceable order when that happens.
And Tony, if there are serious conflicts between spouses, such as restraining orders or maybe criminal allegations, how does that change the way a divorce case usually unfolds?
It has a drastic impact, at least in the initial stages of a divorce. So as far as parenting time is concerned, if there's criminal proceedings, if it's against the other spouse, then that's going to be problematic for parenting time, because obviously that other spouse isn't going to be able to coordinate with you for pickups and drop-offs of children. If there's a restraining order, you're not even going to be able to communicate about it, which is all the more reason, if those things happened before the divorce, you need to get into divorce court as quickly as possible, because the probate and family court judge has the authority to modify a restraining order to allow for communications solely about the children and for pickups and drop-offs. Um, Often, although I hate to have this happen, pickups and drop-offs can end up winding up being at a police station because that's the safest place for the parties to make sure that there's no allegations of wrongdoing, and so that if the person who is the alleged victim of a crime feels safe. I hate to do it. I always try to work it out where a family member may coordinate pickups and drop-offs, but it isn't always feasible. So there's a lot of different things that make the initial stages complicated, not the least of which being, if you're the party accused of a crime, you can't really be speaking at that point. You shouldn't be saying anything, because anything you say in those proceedings can be used against you in your criminal proceedings. So it's very important to work with your attorney about the entirety of your case. And I strongly recommend, if you do have those kinds of involvements, that you find an attorney that is versed both in criminal law and in family law, so that you have one point of contact for all of your work, not multiple lawyers.
That makes sense. The expense could get out of hand really quickly. Speaking of which, shifting gears, for someone trying to protect their financial interests, what documents or information should they gather early in the divorce process?
Well, I always tell my clients to do a financial inventory, to kind of sit down and evaluate, what do I have for life insurance? What do I have for retirement accounts? What do I have for cars, boats, houses? And then also start thinking about potential inheritances. Am I the beneficiary of a trust? Because that is something that can be divisible in a divorce depending on the nature of the trust, how it's written. Obviously, the first things you'll have to do are the things I mentioned earlier, which are you have to gather 3 years of bank statements, 3 years of statements for any kind of securities accounts, 3 years of tax returns, 3 years of any loan applications you've filed. But then it's important to talk to your lawyer about the entirety of your financial situation. If you are the beneficiary of a trust, your lawyer is going to want to review that trust to see if it's something that could be subject to your divorce or if it's protected.
And Tony, does it matter who files for divorce first in Massachusetts, or does it really give one spouse an advantage?
Massachusetts is what we call a no-fault state. We do have fault divorce, but it's very rarely used. Fault divorce can be substantially more expensive. Most people are never willing to agree that they're at fault. So it makes settling a divorce much more complicated. I would say likely 95% of divorces are filed as your standard no-fault divorce. So in those cases, it really does not matter who filed first, because neither party is going to be found to have been at fault either way. So the only thing that really needs to be demonstrated is that there has been an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage.
That makes sense. Here's where I want to leave it today. For someone who has just been served with divorce papers and feels overwhelmed, what are the most important steps that they can take early to put themselves in the best position moving forward?
Well, I would say obviously find an attorney as quickly as possible. Get the counterclaim filed as soon as possible. Start doing your financial inventory right away, and start evaluating your life. And if you have children, start evaluating what you think you can feasibly do in terms of parenting time, because everybody wants to default to 50-50, but sometimes that's not feasible for you or not in your children's best interests. So you really want to take a step back and look at your life objectively, which is one of the reasons I always tell people to get a therapist, because that is a person who can help you step back from the emotions of the divorce and look at things objectively and say, what is in the best interest of my child here? What is in the best interest of my future and my financial well-being, and how do I need to get there? It does not have to be a burn the ground and salt the earth scenario. It's hard. Divorce is painful, especially if you didn't see it coming. And the natural instinct is to resort to burning the world down. But at the end of the day, ask yourself, is that ever going to get me where I want to be?
I really appreciate that insight. What does life look like after the divorce is over? Sometimes we get caught in the moment of it and we can't see that. And I can see how burning the woods down, burning the forest down, and you can't see the forest through the trees kind of situation. Final thoughts on today's episode.
Just simply that understand that this is just one step in the rest of your life. Don't get bogged down in the pain and the hurt that you're feeling right now, but understand that this too shall pass, and look at your life objectively. Look at the rest of your life with your children. Understand that, especially if you do have children, this is a person who's going to be in your life, whether you are still a married couple or not. So ask yourself, how do I want to live with this person for the next 10 or 20 years? And let that be what guides you throughout the entirety of the divorce process.
Thank you, Tony. And folks, that's it for today's episode of Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo. To learn more about attorney Anthony Puopolo and his work across Massachusetts family and criminal courts, visit agplawoffices.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to leave a review, and subscribe for the show so that you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.